right, hello everyone. This is David Ellers with Mation. I'm the Business Development Manager for the Phoenix Contact product line here at Mation. And with me today for our newsletter Brains content, I have Justin Shade from Phoenix Contact. Justin, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for us?
Hey, Dave. Thanks for having me. My name is Justin Shade. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Specialist at Phoenix Contact for all of our wireless components. So that's all of our proprietary 900 megahertz products, industrial Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular, anything with a radio in it, I'm responsible for.
Excellent. I see you got some great radio pictures there right behind you. So let's talk about our content today. We're trying to help educate customers today on what conflicts they may have with a Wi-Fi system, what the channels are all about, what kind of distances they would expect with different channels and how that works. So I think we're ready to roll through that. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, sounds good. So let's see. All right. Yeah. So it's a big topic in wireless in general, but specifically with Wi-Fi is, what is good signal strength? How do I get these data rates that, you hear on all the marketing collateral, whether it's, from Phoenix Contact or what you're hearing on a commercial on TV. So I wanted to kind of try to make that a little more clear. Also go over some of the terminology that we're hearing today in the industry, whether that's on TV or from a vendor that you're talking to. And again, just kind of try to clear that up. So agenda-wise, go through some terminology, go over some of the channels, what we have today, what's coming tomorrow, and then try to, again, open up that conversation and understand of what is signal strength, what impacts signal strength, and how signal strength and capabilities of components, drive that data rate and how to achieve those higher data rates.
That's great, because I think we've both been in a situation where we've had radios out in the field. We get the call from the customer and it says, hey, it's not working and I'm only 100 feet away, and then you find there's machinery or concrete walls or something in between them, and we do have ways to get through and around those.
Yeah, and it's understanding why you're getting what you're getting, right? So, I mean, right. You see this number on a box or on a piece of paper, and, the user is not understanding why they're not getting that number. So that's the plan today. So the first part of it, I think, is understanding some terminology that is changing in industry depending on who you're talking to.
I see a new one there at the top of the list, that Wi-Fi 6.
Exactly, and so it depends on who you're talking to. So you're talking to someone like me who's been talking wireless for 15 years. You may hear terms like 802.11ax or AC or N that call them under the IEEE, and that's just the terminology the IEEE gave it. And the IEEE is the body that builds the standard for Wi-Fi. So if you're talking to a person with an engineering background who likes the IEEE spec, you may hear terms like the 802.11 terms. If you start talking to an IT professional, the IT world and the consumer world is really shifting towards this Wi-Fi blank terminology, where you see Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 5, Wi-Fi 4. And that was brought on by the Wi-Fi Alliance specifically to make the consumer world understand things easier. So if you go to a non-Wi-Fi person or non-wireless person, you say 802.11 whatever, it doesn't really make sense to them. They don't understand what it is because they don't talk about it, right? It's Wi-Fi. So they started transitioning terminology over to Wi-Fi 5, Wi-Fi 6, and basically the higher the number, the newer it is. So it was more easily digestible to the common user.
Kind of like the iPhone 4, 5, 6, 10, 11,
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you go to Best Buy or you go to Target and you buy a radio, you see it says Wi-Fi. You have a Wi-Fi 5 and a Wi-Fi 6 device, Wi-Fi 6 is newer. You see 802.11ac versus 802.11x, you have no idea what that means. So the biggest thing to take away from this slide or this terminology is they're exactly the same thing. They're equivalent. So if someone says Wi-Fi 6 or someone says 802.11ax, they're exactly the same thing. The IEEE builds a standard, uses the 802.11 terminology. The Wi-Fi Alliance, who is more specifically in compatibility testing for consumer goods, uses the Wi-Fi X. But they're interchangeable. You're seeing it mixed up or mixed in conversation between IT and OT and in the consumer world as well. So look out for those. Wi-Fi 6 is the emerging technology. We'll see here in the slider so what that means for spectrum as well. One big thing about Wi-Fi 6 today is it's not really in the industrial world yet. It's coming. You'll see it a little bit in enterprise. You'll hear it all the time in the residential consumer goods. But it was just ratified about a month ago officially. So probably you'll start seeing widespread devices for Wi-Fi 6 probably in about 6 to 12 months.
Okay. Well, I'm noticing on this chart there's a whole lot of speed differences between the Wi-Fi 1 at 802.11b and what some of us may have in our homes now, the Wi-Fi 4 or 5, the 802.11n and AC. If I have a device in my house that's just an older B device, what's that do to the rest of my network if I have an N or an AC enabled router?
Yep. So a lot of to today, all the newer standards are backwards compatible to an extent with the old standards. So if you have a bunch of old devices that are A, B, or G, and you have a new AC or AX or an N router, they'll be compatible. But what happens when you bring one of those older devices into a newer network is there's protection mechanisms that the access point will go into. And basically what that means is some capabilities of those newer technologies will be disabled to be compatible with the older technologies. I kind of compare it to so we're a German company, so I go to Germany sometimes to meet up with my colleagues over there. And when I get there, they're talking in German, really quick, really smooth, really easy that, they can talk and they can fly through their conversation. When I get into the conversation, all of a sudden everything slows down and they have, I have to talk slower, they have to talk slower to interpret what we're trying to do. That's a protection mechanism. Their native tongue is German, mine is English. When I come into that conversation, we all slow down so we all can understand each other.
So if I have an old Wi-Fi device connected to my AC router, there's a good chance that all of the traffic then is just going to slow down on that network.
Correct. Depending on what is B is the biggest impact because B is an old technology. So you'll see significant slowdown with the A and G devices. It isn't as noticeable, but that is the case. A lot of first generation IoT devices have B only because it was a cheaper way of building these home automation products. We are seeing that change to more of the A and G devices, bringing 5 gigahertz into it, getting the faster technology of G. But you will see, some protection. If you were to take a Wireshark or scope the air, you'd see some protection mechanisms popping on and slowing down the overall speed of the network.
Right. And that's actually why when I configure a wireless device, the first thing I do is I turn off the B access. Just disable it completely. If your device that you want to communicate to it is that old, it should probably be upgraded on your network.
Yeah, and I mean that's one way you can get around that. It's the important part of this, like I mentioned, is if you have some older IoT devices, like some of the early Alexas and Nest thermostats, those are B-only devices. They won't connect to 5 gigahertz. They won't connect to anything. If you turn off the B axis, then all of a sudden all your home automation stuff turns off. But in the industrial space, things like barcode scanners, some old serial to wireless adapters had those B devices in them.
Okay, great.
So moving on. So with these standards, we see the frequencies at 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, and those are the frequencies. And within each of those frequencies, you have a subset of channels that you're able to select to communicate on. And in the U.S., this is our channel allocation. This differs depending on what country you're in and what part of the region of the world you're in. But in the U.S., for 2.4 gigahertz, we have 11 channels we can work on, 1 through 11. And within those 11 channels, there are 3 channels that, when you look at the frequency spectrum, that do not overlap each other. Those are channels 1, 6, and 11. So if you talk to anybody and said, hey, what frequencies what channel should I use on the 2.4 gigahertz, you'll hear a lot of stuff like, only use 1, 6, and 11. And that's the reason why, is because 1, 6, and 11 don't overlap frequency-wise. So if you
there's actually a couple nice charts that I found on Wikipedia that have the bell housing for each channel shown and how they overlap with everything. So.
Yeah, yep. So that's a reason why people today, and especially if you look in your work environment, a lot of 2.4 gigahertz isn't used anymore because you don't have a lot of isolation there. And the same thing with high density environments in the factory floor. It's hard to get a lot of access points there because the proximity is so close that you'll interfere with each other. So that's why you see a lot of 5 gigahertz, which is the table below on the bottom, so that you can see there's many more channels there, and none of those channels overlap. So you could put an access point on, you can see channel 36 here, 40, 44, you put those all right next to each other, and they're frequency-wise, they're not going to overlap, which is really nice if you have a high density of client devices that need to communicate there.
Right. So, well, they won't overlap if everybody's behaving, right?
Correct, yeah.
Because you've got the 20 megahertz and the 40 megahertz wide channels available there, I see.
Yep, so what you see there is when we introduced Wi-Fi 4 or 802.11n, there was the ability to now channel bond. And what that does is gives you a bigger pipe. So you can see, channel 36 here is 20 megahertz wide. That gives you your roughly, 54, 65 megabit per second, depending on what technology you're using. To get these higher data rates that you saw on that previous slide, you needed to bond channels together. So now you're taking side-by-side channels, so channel 36 and channel 40, and you're using them in combination with each other on your access point inclines to create a larger pipe for communication. And then with Wi-Fi 5 or AC, you introduced the 80 and 160 megahertz wide channels, which again gave you a larger pipe to send more data through, which for high data rate applications like video or sometimes even voice, it was needed. The downside to that was you created a larger target for interference, right? So the bigger your pipe, the bigger target that is for things to interfere with it. So if you had, a network here that had 160 megahertz wide channel, and then accidentally someone came and turned on an access point in channel 56, now you're getting interference on this as well. So that could again slow down or cause retries that look like the network's not working.
Right. So I see this in my neighborhood every once in a while. I'll run a network scanner, and I call it network squatting, channel squatting, where one of my neighbors has the 40 megahertz wide activated for several different devices, and it's really not benefiting them any because they've got at max 100 meg internet service, or in a lot of cases people have 20 or 40 meg internet service. So having a 40 megahertz wide channel doesn't benefit them anything if they're trying to stream data or anything like that.
Correct. Yeah. So with those data rates too, so that's another I want to say misleading, but something that's never explained really well to again non-wireless users is that so you look at 802.11n Wi-Fi 4 and the radios we sell have a data rate of 300 megabits per second. And everybody's like, oh, it's great. For my industrial application, that's perfectly fine. And to your point, hey, I have 100 megabit. You used to go, well, I only have a 100 megabit pipe into my house. What is 300 megabits per second? How's that going to benefit me, right?
Right.
I can't stream more than 100. So that data rate that you're seeing is the gross data rate over the air that the radio can handle in an ideal situation. I think of it as the gross. My gross paycheck number, right? It always looks good on paper, but when I see my direct deposit into my account, it's not as much as my gross because there's taxes taken out. Well, there's taxes and Wi-Fi too. It's the protocol overhead that makes everything work. So if you're getting a 300 megabit per second data rate over the air, your net data rate that you can use for your application is roughly, and this is not. It depends. Roughly about 50% of that,
okay.
And that's Wi-Fi in general. That's not, Phoenix Contact Wi-Fi, Vendor B Wi-Fi. That's just Wi-Fi.
It's just the nature of the beast with how the protocols work and how that takes up that extra space.
Correct. Yeah. So there's a lot of overhead to Wi-Fi. So again, one of the biggest questions I have when we launch our products is why don't you have a gigabit port on your radios? Well, if you look at it's 300 megabits per second minus 50%, it's 150. That's in an ideal situation. And if your signal strength is high, signal to noise is low, that's the max you're going to get. In a lot of environments, that's not what you're getting because you're in reflective environments, longer range environments, interference environments, you're not going to get that maximum anyway.
Right.
So that kind of leads into the next. So it's important that you keep isolation, because when Wi-Fi networks are side by side and you have things that are interfering with each other, Wi-Fi is a one talk at a time kind of communication. So an access point talking to a client, only one can talk at a time. A client can't talk to an access point when an access point is trying to talk to a client. So it's half duplex. So it's important to keep isolation between your networks. So
it's like a CB radio from that standpoint, or any pair of handheld radios. One person keys up, and the other person can't talk until they release the key on the radio.
Exactly. So if I'm trying to talk to you and someone's using the same channel as me, start hearing them talk, I'm going to stop and retry, which again looks like the network's not working, but the network's actually doing what it's supposed to do. It's waiting for the channel to clear and then going to try again to make sure that the signal gets through or the data gets through reliably. It's just taking a little longer. And are there
full duplex radios out there?
Wi-Fi wise, not by the standard of Wi-Fi.
Okay.
So if you're looking at standard Wi-Fi fully compatible with every third-party device, no, Wi-Fi is half duplex. The next standard of Wi-Fi they're working on, which is going to be probably 2024, 2025, is planned to be full duplex.
Okay.
The standard's escaping me right now, but that's what they're talking about, full duplex Wi-Fi.
So probably more antennas sitting on the top and then dual channels, so one can talk on one channel and listen on the other.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's going to be different. It's going to be a pretty big change. But right now, everything's half duplex. So channel availability is important here. So that's why a lot of times when you go to a factory floor, you want to put something on a Wi-Fi on a machine. Who owns that network? The IT group. And the IT group is really focused on making sure that the spectrum is used efficiently and no one's just dropping different devices randomly into the factory floor. So there'll be some conversations, or there should be some conversations about who's going to use what channels, where you're going to use channels in the factory. But what's going to happen tomorrow, and not literally tomorrow, but when Wi-Fi 6 comes out, there's going to be a standard called Wi-Fi 6E, which is the 6 gigahertz version of Wi-Fi 6. And what that's going to do is open up a whole new 1,200 megahertz of channels for Wi-Fi.
Wow, that's a lot of spectrum.
Yeah, so if you can see, this is what we have today, 580 megahertz, and they're adding 1,200 megahertz to that spectrum. So from a high density standpoint, a channel planning standpoint, we're going to have a whole lot more availability here to keep our systems isolated and reliable and not interfere with each other. So this is going to be really exciting once we start seeing chipsets, the chipset manufacturers building the Wi-Fi 6E cards and getting them out to industry.
I guess this is really big news for people that have large facilities with multiple Wi-Fi access points that are really on separate networks and trying to keep them separated. Now, when this comes available, they'll really be able to separate them out on channels and get much better data throughout.
Exactly. You're going to have better efficiency and better reliability, because you're going to have the ability to spread out more. Now, the 6 gigahertz will obviously be a different chipset. So what's nice about it is we're not talking about Wi-Fi 6 today, but we're going to have this whole new standard at Wi-Fi 6 that is going to be it can work on 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. But you're also going to have Wi-Fi 6E that only works on 6 gigahertz and has some enhanced security requirements on the 6 gigahertz band and some features and functions that are required on the 6 gigahertz band that will be nice, because you can say, hey, if I need higher security or I need more reliability or I need to just put it on the 6 gigahertz band. Leave everything else where it is. Keep my existing infrastructure and applications and functions and functions working on 5 gigahertz and 2.4. Put this new application on 6, because I know I'm not going to get interference there, because only these devices that I'm getting right now can work on that channel. So it's going to be a nice flexible option for plant managers and users that need to add more stuff to their plant floor.
Well, that sounds great. Can't wait till it hits the floor.
So with that too, so building on to that channel planning, this is an eye chart, so I'll try to talk through what we're looking at here. But when you look at, that's the question you mentioned it too. What's good signal strength? How do I get these data rates that I'm talking about, and how do I know if I have a good reliable signal? And it comes down to a couple of things. The first thing I always say is, what's your application and what do you need? Do you need the high data rates? That's always the first question I ask people. But if you're looking to maximize your throughput, your data rate, it comes down to a couple things. One is making sure, again, your channel's clean, right? You want to have, they recommend that your duty cycle on your channel is 30% or less busy. That's the recommendation. Once you get above 30, again, you get all those retries and things can't get through cleanly. But the other two things that are important on this table are signal strength and signal to noise. So signal strength is how good your signal is between the two devices, two stations. And signal to noise is the difference or the delta between your signal strength and other noise around you. So there's a delta there. So the recommendation for that difference is roughly 10 or 15 to 20 dB difference. So if my signal strength from my client to my access point is negative 60, my noise floor should be negative 80 or better. It gives them that buffer that if some noise jumps up or some other stuff's introduced, it's not going to bleed over and the radio can still interpret what Wi-Fi is and what the noise is. So when you look at this chart, this is the modulation coding scheme. This is the data rate levels for 802.11n and AC, so Wi-Fi 4 and Wi-Fi 5. And again, this is a big eye chart, but if you look down the very bottom here, this is saying when I'm looking, so if you look at this table in the far right bottom corner, the blue, all this blue is a Wi-Fi 5 device, 802.11 AC, and it's saying if I have 160 megahertz wide channels. We talked about 160 megahertz wide channels, really wide. And I want to reach this 2.3 gigabit per second data rate that's here. I need, where'd it go? I'm trying to find on my screen. I told you it's a eye chart. I need to have 3 spatial streams. So that's saying that I need to have each of my devices have to support 3 simultaneous streams of data, and I have to have a certain data rate, a certain signal strength, and a certain signal to noise. So that is usually for AC 160 megahertz wide channels at the negative 40 signal strength with a 35 dB signal to noise ratio. So that means I have to have a really, really strong signal, and I have to have a really, really big buffer for my signal to noise. Now, again, I don't know who listening to the audience has ever tried to have a 5 gigahertz radio with 160 megahertz wide channel at anywhere farther than about 10 feet and get those 40, negative 40 signal strength with a 20 to 30 dB signal to noise ratio. It's almost impossible. Free space loss itself will knock down that signal strength to past negative 40 at 5 gigahertz. So
that drops off pretty quickly then.
It drops off very quickly. My opinion personally is that AC was really built for consumer goods. So your Xbox, your TVs, your streaming devices in your house, because you're really close to your router, right?
Right.
Or even in enterprise, the router's in the ceiling, your access point's in the ceiling, your voice over IP phone or your computer is on your desk 10 feet from the ceiling. That's where you get these higher data rates. So once you get past 10 or 15 feet away, your signal strength drops, your signal noise drops enough that you're dropping data rates up, you're dropping these coding schemes really quickly. So again, what I say is, these numbers are great to see on paper,
but in reality, they're really hard to attain.
They're almost impossible to attain, especially in industrial, because there's so much going on. There's so much other energy. There's so much other stuff, reflections and noise in the environment that you're not going to have that ideal environment to get those things. So that's why I say, it's a marketing term. It's we put it in our data sheets too. We have this gross data rate. You're probably never going to get those gross data rates in applications. But again, do you need them?
Right.
If you look at applications, what are you sending? A lot of industrial automation protocol, Ethernet IP, Profinet, Modbus. And with those, what's the important part? It's small packets, but they need to come efficiency and reliably. So I need to get it there in 30 milliseconds. I don't care. It's not going to be a big packet. It's 100 bytes. I don't need 2.3 gigabits of throughput. I need to get that 100 bytes through in 30 milliseconds.
So if you're trying to synchronize 30 axes of servo, Wi-Fi is probably not going to do it for you.
I mean, in my experience, 50 to 100 milliseconds for Wi-Fi is really the reliable area where you're not going to get nuisance trips, right? So if you're doing control or you're doing safety, 50 milliseconds is really my recommendation for the speed maximum. Can you go faster? You absolutely can. I've seen it happen. It works. But for safety in motion, one missed packet, and can cause problems,
right.
Practically, right? A robot arm throws something, a safety vehicle doesn't stop, right? So
for printing applications, your inks don't line up, so right.
Yeah, exactly. So does 30 milliseconds if I miss a packet on an AGV taking something over to a staging area, does that matter? Probably not, right? It's not a safety signal. It's just, hey, I missed one signal. I want updates every 30 milliseconds for my AGV. I missed one. I don't really care. All the control is done on the cart. So that's why I say, what matters to the application? What are we looking to achieve here? So understanding, the signal strength, the signal to noise, the capabilities of your devices. So I mentioned these streams down here again, right? Three streams. When you get up into these higher data rates, and especially with Wi-Fi 6, those things can send 4, 5, or 6 streams of data, the access points. A lot of our devices, consumer goods, do 2. A lot of industrial radios do 2 or 3. You don't see a lot of things with 4, 5, or 6 streams because, like you mentioned before, we need 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 antennas on our device. All of a sudden, the cost of that radio goes up really quickly.
Right.
So just important to pay attention to that kind of stuff. If you see a data sheet with a device that says I do all of these data rates and functions, look at it a little closer and understand what you need and the capabilities. A lot of the times they're going to say you need 3 or 4 or 5 spatial streams. You need to support 160 megahertz wide channels. Does your facility support you having an access point with 160 megahertz wide channels? I would say the majority of the time the answer to that is no. It's going to be hard to find a factory floor that doesn't have Wi-Fi there and has 160 megahertz wide channel available to you. So with that, signal strength wise, probably the biggest thing that impacts signal strength is your antenna positioning, making sure you have good line of sight to your access point. So with Wi-Fi, we're in the 2.4, the 5 gigahertz. Those are higher frequencies, so higher frequencies attenuate faster over the air. So the further you go away, if everything else is the same, the higher frequencies will go shorter. So making sure you have, clear line of sight to your access points, good antennas, depending on your application, higher gain antennas. If you need the ability to remotely mount them, your radio has external antenna connectors. Make sure you have space in your control cabinet to mount it and everything.
Right. Yeah, a little bit of metal can really bounce that signal around and mess you up. So you've got why don't we finish up with the chart on what a typical factory may look like today?
Yeah, this is a nice little image that we saw at a customer. So talk about this, usually when I get phone calls from, salespeople, with hey, something's not working. These are the kind of things I hear, and this is the typical, general misconception with Wi-Fi is, hey, it's too slow, it drops out, I'm not getting enough bandwidth. And, again, like I said, bandwidth is relative to your application, but, most applications are really, really small packets. So it all comes down to this RF availability and what do my channels look like? Because, again, if you're using channels that are dense, you're getting retries, so it slows down your communication. If there's too much energy or too much, duty cycle in that channel, you could time out your communication. The Wi-Fi may never drop out, but it's only going to retry so many times. And the more retries you have, when a packet can't get through on a Wi-Fi radio, that table we showed, that data rate starts to drop down because what the Wi-Fi device is trying to do is make sure that packet gets through. Right. So at higher data rates, it needs higher signal strength. If it gets a retry, it's going to go, I can't do it at this data rate. I need to drop down. So your overall data rate is going to drop if you have a high density environment like this.
Yeah. It's interesting in that image that you have there, how much 2.4 gigahertz activity they have, and yet there's some big open channel spaces at the 5 gigahertz level. I'm wondering if they're maybe saving that space for something special.
Yeah, so those middle channels there, from like 52 to 140 on the 5 gigahertz range requires something called dynamic frequency selection, DFS. That's a special approval you need from the FCC, and basically it's a set of frequencies mostly used mostly outdoors, where weather radar, airports, and important communication happens. So the access points have to listen, and if they detect the signature on those frequencies, they have to change. So depending on the vendor, depending on what's going on, you may see a big gap in the middle there. A lot of vendors today have features and functions to do that now. That they use them inside because you won't get those signatures inside a factory. Outside, if you're around an airport, you'll see it all the time.
Right. Well, that's great. I appreciate the education today on Wi-Fi and channels and frequency allocation. I hope our customers did as well. And certainly here at the end of the video, we'll have phone numbers and contact information. So please feel free to contact us if you have a Wi-Fi application, and we are available to help do Wi-Fi surveys. If you're looking at doing an install and you need to know what channels are available and what your likelihood is to have a high throughput, we can help. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Justin.
Thanks, David.